Oh, hey, you guys catch up on some sleep last night? What's up? Yeah? Maybe? No, y'all just partied all night. A little extra? All right, whatever. Hey, no judgment, judgment-free zone. Welcome to Christ City. Glad that you're here. My name is Matthew. I serve as pastor of teaching and outreach here at Christ City. Want to kind of say, we kind of share this periodically, but I know that a number of you are newer to Christ City, and you're like, I've been like 4 weeks in a row, and it's been a different person up there kind of every week. Like, it's like a variety show up here. What's happening? And you just heard from Sarah Bell, the chair of our elder board. Eric, one of our elders, is back on the production team. Melody Hood and others. One of the things that's consistently been a value for us at Christ City is a recognition that we want to hear from the Lord as fully and faithfully as we can. And so what that means is that when we come to this moment where we open the scriptures and where we preach and pray, and when we lead worship, and when we have leadership at some of the highest levels for Christ City, that there's a sense of shared leadership. That there's a recognition that if we only hear the gospel preached to us from a singular voice, well, there are going to be things that we miss. There's going to be ways that my voice from my social location, that there's going to be ways that I don't fully or faithfully see the gospel. And so I need to hear the gospel preached to me from people of color and from women, from marginalized voices, and from folks that are younger than me, and folks that are older than me, and folks that live in D.C. and folks that don't. And we want to harmonize those voices because there is a single unified gospel of good news that invites all of us to experience liberation and healing and salvation. And even as it relates to how we lead and govern and care for the souls of those that call Christ City home, that there's a rotation of leadership and that there's shared leadership. As we operate on our elder board, there's not a chief elder, that there's, when we walk into that room, that the field is level for all of us, and all of the voices are important and needed and necessary because the Spirit moves in a multitude of ways. And so that's why you see this. Today you get me. So I get to come off the bench, and here I am. So continue to pray. I want to welcome back, by the way, so we got a sabbatical coming up, and we got a sabbatical coming to a finish. Drea Ackerman is back from her sabbatical. Good, great. I can stop receiving those away messages from you when I email you randomly. Just send you blank emails just so I can feel like we're connected still during sabbatical. And be like, oh, yeah, no, still not checking those. I got a question for you this morning. What comes to mind when I say the word peace? Say the word peace. You got it? What comes to mind? Just talk back to me. Out loud. Some of you are communicating mentally. Mm-hmm. Oh, that's good. Shalom. All right. Tranquility. Equal rights. Come on. Justice. Did you say justice or Texas? Justice. We'll go with justice. Although, What's that? Time away from the kids. Good. Great. A nap. All right. What? Rightness. Over here. Harmony. Give me one more. Protest. Any other images or thoughts or feelings that come when you... What's that? Delusional. Hey, yo, I feel that. Yeah, naive. Some of the things that may come to mind for you are just like some of the things that you've said already. Things like, no more war, hiking, nap. Maybe it's like an image or a symbol that you see, like the, sort of the peace symbol. It's just, it's depending on the context, it's either like deuces or like peace, depending. Or maybe it's the peace sign, circle, looks like the Mercedes car, but with an extra leg to it, Perhaps images of the 1960s peace movement or civil rights movements where they're sticking flowers into the barrels of machine guns. Or more recently, Black Lives Matter protests with images that stir a rage for peace. Or yesterday's anti-war protests against the war in Israel and Palestine and calls for a free Palestine. Or you think of things more personally, maybe. Like you're like, oh, I wasn't even thinking that global. I was like, warm cup of tea, like sunsets, sunrises, a hike in the Shenandoahs just as the leaves are turning. Mary Rowe, where you at? She just walked yesterday. All of these things, all of these images and actions, they're certainly things that capture different aspects of peace. They're all true and they're all right. And in so many ways, they are all insufficient, even as they address some of the aspects of peace or feelings of peace that are pressing on our lives or that we're aching for. This morning, what we are going to begin is a 4-week series. It's focused on our calling as Christians to be peacemakers. And we want to, over the next month, we want to grapple with the biblical notions of peace and what Jesus is inviting us into when he calls us to be those that make for peace. As much as anything, for this series in general and this morning in particular, I want me to consider God's imagination for peace, because I'm going to be frank and honest and a bit open with you today. I need it. My hope is that we collectively become captivated by what God says peace is and what peace can be. But before we get there, I don't think I have to tell you how violently out of control our world is. I'm not sure I can enumerate the ways that violence continues its brutal march in the world. We're approaching 10,000 killed in Gaza since war was declared against Hamas by Israel in the wake of Israel's attack on Israeli concert goers earlier in October. This is to say nothing of the apartheid-like situation that's enacted on the Palestinian people. It's going to be 2 years in February since Russia invaded Ukraine, thrusting the two countries into a war that continues with no end or resolution in sight. A new wave of military and political violence in Sudan began earlier this year and continues to leave that beautiful and war-weary country with a rising death toll at the hands of militaries and famines and corruption. And our own city is seeing rising violence. D.C. has seen a significant rise in violent crimes this year compared to previous years, with increases in carjackings and gun-related violence. We're currently on pace to see more murders in our city than we've seen in 2 decades. And these staggering and heartbreaking statistics and stories, they can numb us to the truth that behind all of these stats, behind every figure and number is a person, is an image bearer of God whose life has been taken or broken or otherwise marred. I realize that even in this room, as I'm looking out over all of you friends, that there are those of you for whom these things are not distant stories, but are stories of your own families living through the pain of war and oppression. I know that many of you have been victims of violence in this city and have had to wrestle with what it means to have been victimized and dehumanized and attacked. And for others, still you're struggling not with the violence out there somewhere in the world, but you're wrestling more personally with an utter absence of peace within your own family or within a family member who's battling inner demons that seem bent on their destruction and the shredding of any sense of peace. Peace, it can seem so very elusive, and violence so present. So before we go on with any more talk of peace, I want to name the truth that many of us have walked into this room and into this moment with scars that are not seen because of violence that we've experienced even this week. Saints, siblings, children of God, I want you to know that you are seen by God, that your wounds are not forgotten, that your plight that it's not lost on God, that you have not lost God's gaze, nor are you outside of God's care. And I know that words can feel hollow, but God's presence never is. And while answers, especially answers to questions like why or how come, they don't arrive with any frequency. what is available is community. These folks here, a community that can carry pain together, that can carry tears and questions and hopes and hurts. And we can listen, we can pray together, and we can cuss together. It's okay. Pastor says so. We can be the hands and the hugs and the tears of Jesus. Certainly, we're not going to get it right every time. We're going to let one another down sometimes. But more days than not, as we all work to make sense of the violence in the world and push for peace, we can imperfectly represent to one another that another world is possible because of Christ in any moment and on the other side of any pain. How we got to this series, why we decided to start this, I gotta say it's been a bit of a year-long process, just to be honest. The series came about really because of my own wrestling with violence and trying to sort out what does it mean to be a peacemaker. In a sermon, I just found it. I was looking at it last night again in a sermon almost at the end of last year. I'd shared that there had been a series of events that had hit really close to home for me and for my family, and it rocked me. One of my children had been attacked on the bus. And then on a separate occasion, he was attacked on the street. Another of my sons lost a childhood friend to gun violence. And then after that, their school went on lockdown because of shootings that were taking place right outside of the school building. This all took place in a matter of 3 or 4 months. And I was trying to process how to trust Jesus with this. Like, how do I trust Jesus with my life and with the lives of, these kiddos, especially when I feel like my city is letting me down, and anger and exasperation and cynicism, they keep trying to recruit me to their team, and I'm looking at like hope and peace and joy, and I'm asking, what y'all got for me? Because I'm feeling like team anger is okay for me right now. And about that time, we were heading to our annual staff retreat as a staff, where we do a good bit of praying and kind of planning for the year ahead and mapping out sermons for the year. And I go into this retreat, and I'm kind of sharing with everybody, hey, this is what I'm at. This is where I'm at. And because I'm processing sort of the pain that's going on in my city and in my family, and because I'm a pastor, I've got like one tool to use. And I'm like, you know what? I'm really wrestling with like the violence in my city and what's going on, and how do I care for my family? You know what we should do is a sermon series. Because like that's the only solution I got in my bag of tricks. Side note, and I have several side notes to the sermon, I'm just going to let you know. We made a joke in our sermon kind of debrief conversation. We have a sermon planning meeting every week. And I said, it's not really good for pastors to stand up and like process their pain on their congregation. It's not like free counseling. And I feel like I'm coming dangerously close to being a hypocrite in this very moment. But I'm just trying to give you some context. So I say this to say that we're starting this series today, not in response to recent events, but out of a collective ache that has been long simmering to know, how do we as a church and how do we as followers of Jesus respond as Jesus would have us to respond when faced with the violence and brokenness in the world. Side note, we leave on Monday for that same staff retreat. Pray for your boy. Pray for all of us. And I'll keep you posted on what the sermons for next year are going to be. The title of the series and the invitation for this series, it comes from a passage in Matthew 5. It's where Jesus is teaching what the kingdom of God is like and what the ethic of God's kingdom looks like. Matthew 5 is the longest of Jesus' teachings, and it runs for a couple of chapters in Matthew's gospel. These teachings, they're often most commonly referred to as the Sermon on the Mount, because it takes place in the hills that surround the Sea of Galilee. And this opening section of Jesus' sermon is called the Beatitudes because it follows a common literary form or literary pattern that we see in the Bible, particularly in the Old Testament. And the pattern says, happy or blessed are those that, ... for they will, ... That's the pattern. Happy, blessed are, for they will. It was common in the Hebrew Bible and the Old Testament. And so it's that structure that Jesus begins to open his sermon with. This is his oratory and literary device that he begins with. He begins with a way of teaching that the first hearers would have recognized because they would have heard it in the Hebrew Bible. But he uses it to describe the values of God's kingdom in a way that would have been altogether new. This is how he opens, Matthew 5, beginning of verse 3. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of God. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. I know it may seem like ages ago because it was like ages ago, way back in 2020. We did a series on the Beatitudes, and I would encourage you to give those sermons a listen to where there's a fuller rendering and explanation of that whole section. In addition to our teaching team here at Christ City, of me and Justin and Drea and Lisa, we also invited our friends Brandon Rencher and Pastor Tanetta from the Table Church here in D.C., and also Inez Velasquez McBride from Fuller Seminary to preach. It's a remarkable series. I would commend it to you. But what we can see that Jesus is doing here in this opening salvo is he is upending the prevailing narrative of what it means to be blessed and what it means to be favored. He's saying that it's not the strong or the mighty or the wealthy or the influential. Those aren't the marks of what it means to be favored by God or to be favored ones. But rather it's the poor, it's the meek, it's the mourning ones, it's the merciful ones. Those are the ones that God views as blessed. They are the ones who get to have God's kingdom. They are the ones that get comfort. They are the ones that get to inherit the earth. And they are the ones that are favored by God. It's this upside down ethic, this upside down set of values that he is espousing. It's a set of values that can be disorienting to the comforted and the comfortable. And then Jesus arrives at our anchor verse, Matthew 5, verse 9. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be children of God. Blessed are the peacemakers. This is actually, it's a unique phrasing. As it's articulated, as Jesus says it here in Matthew 5, peacemaker, it's actually only used in this spot in the New Testament. There's other places where similar phrases are used, like live peaceably or work to live at peace, etc., that they're used, but it's only here that Jesus uses this compound word of peacemaker. It's a hybrid word in the Greek. Irene, the Greek word for peace, and poeo, the word that means to do or to make. What's interesting about the word poeo is it also means to bring forth or to work for or to keep, as in to hold fast to something. And then my favorite, it also means to deal, as in dealing cards at a table or other things on the street. This is the word that Jesus is using, that we are to be those that deal in peace. Jesus is saying that the ones that are blessed, those who are happy, those that enjoy God's favor are the ones that work for, bring forth, hold fast to, and deal in peace. That's what it means to be blessed. And he concludes this beatitude by saying that those that engage in this work, that they are the ones that get to be children of God. And that too is a unique phrase that would have been familiar to those first hearers. This would have been a mind blower for those that were sitting on those hills around that sea. You see, the phrase children of God was most often used to describe Israel or those that God had chosen. And sometimes it was used to designate those who had lived righteously. But it's here in this case that Jesus takes that phrase out of its normal use and is saying that those that get to be counted as God's children, well, they aren't the ones who get to be embraced because of ethnicity or some birthright, but rather they are those that work for and labor for and seek after and deal in peace. Those are the ones that God chooses. Those are the ones who get to be children of God. To spin it around another way, it's saying, you want to know who's included into God's family? It's those that make for peace. When you see those marks, when you see that evidenced in someone's life, those that are working for and holding fast to peace, that's how you know that person has encountered the living God. Lisa and I were talking, we were at a wedding this week, and we were talking about one of the first weddings that we went to with the kids, with Nathan and Eliza. They were real little. I didn't get their permission to tell us, okay, you good, solid, perfect, thank you. They were really small. They don't even remember this. We were at a wedding. Interestingly enough, side note, we were at a wedding, and the bride and the groom's name was Nathan, and the bride's name was Annalise. What? Anyways, in San Francisco, I'm up there. It was like one of my first weddings. It was super long. Like, I was so long. I went back and looked at that joint. I'm like, why did I, it's not church. Shorten it. But anyway, and what happened was Nathan was not behaving very well. He was all over the place. He was crawling. Hey, bro, you gave me permission, bro. It was on the spot. And Lisa was getting frustrated. She was like, hey, stop, sit down, bro. Stop this. Quit making noise. Your dad's, they're trying to, vow to one another. What are you? And then in her frustration, she says, this is not how a Watson behaves at a wedding. To which Nathan replies, well, I don't want to be a Watson then. So apparently the calculus in his mind was, behaving at weddings was a mark of being a child of Watson. And he was like, no, thank you. The mark of being a child of God is that we work for, that we hold fast to, that we make, and that we deal in peace, even in a world bent on violence. That's how you know if someone is a child of God. Jesus, in his Sermon on the Mount, he's inviting those first hearers to be peacemakers. Now, we have a grasp of kind of what Jesus is saying, but what does that mean? What does it mean to work for peace? Is Jesus is he just asking us hey, don't fight with people? Don't make war? Or maybe not even outside, maybe it's sort of inner peace. Is Jesus just saying center yourself? Find inner peace, as though that was a simple thing. To answer that question, it can be helpful to look a little deeper into how the Bible describes peace. And what we find is that peace, from this biblical perspective, it isn't simply the absence of something like war or conflict, but peace is also the presence of something else, namely human flourishing. The two words that the Bible uses for peace are irene in the New Testament, which we've mentioned, and then in the Hebrew Bible, a word that you may be more familiar with is shalom. These two words and their uses together paints a picture of God's imagination for peace. Shalom, or peace in the Scriptures, it's just a beautiful and it's a nuanced word, and each time it's used in the Bible, we get to see a different facet of peace. Shalom's a word that is both earthy and ethereal. It's very practical, but it can turn towards the theoretical. It can pivot to being quite personal and internal. Peace in the Bible, it's complex, but it's not complicated. It's a holistic sense of rightness and well-being. And what I want to do, with the time that we've got remaining, is I want to channel my inner Willie Gary. Anybody seen The Burial on Amazon? You know what I'm talking about? No clue. That's all right. Check it out. Jamie Foxx, amazing actor. He's a trial lawyer, and when he's talking to the jury, he says, look, I just want to talk simple to you. Plain, ordinary talk. And then he goes on to win the case. That's what I want to do. So we'll talk about peace in a plain and simple and ordinary way. And the definition I want to fool with about what peace is that it's just the way that things ought to be. Peace is just the way that things ought to be. Specifically, the way that things ought to be for people, the way that things ought to be between people, and then the way that things ought to be inside and within people. First dimension for peace that the Bible often talks about is peace as the way that things ought to be for people. This is especially with regard to the material and physical needs, the resources and circumstances that make for peace for people. And this aspect of shalom asks if people have what they need materially or physically in order to thrive and in order to flourish and to be cared for. Genesis 37, in the opening chapters of the Bible, it's a story of Joseph. He's in the Old Testament. And Joseph's dad, Jacob, he sends Joseph out to check on his brothers and to check on the livestock. This is the story of Joseph, coat of many colors, thrown in the wells before all the bad stuff happens. In Genesis 37, Jacob just says to Joseph, he says, go and see if all is well with your brothers and with the flocks, and bring word back to me. And then he sent him, Joseph, off to the valley, from that valley of Hebron. The phrase that's translated into English, if all is well, is the Hebrew word shalom. Jacob is telling Joseph, go and check in on their shalom. Go and make sure that the things are as they ought to be. Make sure that they have what they need. Make sure the cows have what they need. No just like tattletale, which is maybe part of the problem. Just make sure that they're well, that they have what they need. And this peace is not simply the absence of something like war or violence, but rather it's the provision of something that will be a contribution to the life and well-being of that other person. The question that this aspect of shalom invites us to ask in order to step towards being peacemakers is, what can I do in this moment to contribute to this person's well-being? What can I do to contribute to this person that is in front of me that I can contribute to their peace? We had a baby dedication last week, a couple weeks ago. I lose track. There's been like 30,000 babies born at Christ City in 2023. It's stunning. One of the things that happens when a baby's born is that somebody in their small group or on the ministry team, they set up something called a meal train. It's online. You guys know what a meal train is? Don't know what a meal train is? Yeah, it's like a sign-up. It's a spreadsheet, really. It's a fancy spreadsheet. And it's a way to sign up to provide meals for newly minted parents. It typically occurs in small groups and on ministry teams. So again, quick plug for small groups and ministry teams, especially if you want to get in on some of that meal train action. But it's not just for new parents, by the way. Small groups have used this to care for single folks, for others, that in a variety of ways, just to provide meals or rides or other kinds of support. Even this past month, small groups and ministry teams have worked to provide meals for people who have had medical emergencies, who have been released from hospital stays, or have needed a bit of care that a home-cooked meal or a DoorDash gift card can provide. Now, we often think of this just as like simple acts of like community and compassion, and that's true. But this act of providing for people, if I can elevate it, is actually an act of peacemaking. Similarly, each month when small groups or others from Christ City, when they volunteer at minor PTO meetings, it's not just an act of volunteerism, but rather it's making it possible for parents, especially single parents, to be a more active participant and engaged in the lives of their child's education and engaged in the school system. It's an act of peacemaking, of working to set things right, set things as they ought to be for people. And now listen, you don't have to be sending meals to parents or folks that are home recovering, and you don't have to tutor kiddos once a month at minor in order to answer Jesus' invitation to be a peacemaker. There's folks right in your neighborhoods. Whether you live in Hyattsville or Alexandria, or even if you live in faraway places like Columbia Heights, like there's folks in your neighborhood, in your community, that need you to be a peacemaker and provide for something that they're lacking in this moment, and to do it in a dignified way so that they have what they need in order to flourish. The second area of peace that the Bible often describes is the way that things ought to be between people. This is an aspect of peace that addresses the way that peace can be made between people individually or collectively. It's the way things ought to be between two people or two peoples. How do we seek peace and make for peace when there's been a rupture in a relationship that we have with somebody, a friend or a family member, a coworker, or a neighbor? At the interpersonal level, this is what is meant by passages such as in Romans 12 when Paul says, if at all possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everybody. To be one who works for peace is to be one who seeks to live peaceably with those that are around you. And yet shalom is more than just about ensuring that two people get along. Shalom doesn't stop there. But it seeks to ensure that things are as they ought to be between peoples or people groups or even nations. Shalom, true peace, is a state of living and being where peoples that are at odds with each other, even those that are bent on each other's annihilation, can find a way forward where both groups experience harmony with one another and a sense of rightness and care and mutual flourishing. It's at this point that justice and righteousness enter the chat. In the Scriptures, the word for justice and righteousness, it's the same word. It's used interchangeably. It's in English where we have separated those two out, but that's not the case in the Bible. There isn't a distinction between justice and righteousness. They're held together. You can't have one without the other. And as such, the Scriptures consistently identify peace as the fruit of justice and righteousness. In the prophet Isaiah, it's described this way in chapter 34. The Lord's justice will dwell in the desert. His righteousness will live in the fertile field, meaning there's no place where God's justice and righteousness cannot be found. And the fruit of that righteousness, justice, is peace. The psalmist in Psalm 85 poetically announces the arrival of shalom on the heels of justice. At the end of that psalm in verse 10, love and faithfulness, they meet together. Righteousness, justice, and peace, they kiss each other, they're intimate. Faithfulness springs forth from the earth, and righteousness, justice looks down from heaven. The Lord will indeed give what is good, and our land will yield its harvest. Righteousness, justice goes before Him. It goes before peace and prepares the way for peace's steps. Justice and peace kiss. Righteousness prepares the way. As philosopher and author Nicholas Wolterstorff notes, shalom is intertwined with justice. In shalom, each person individually and collectively enjoys justice. What is striking about this language is that it isn't only the language of right relationship and the securing of rights, but the language of shalom is one of even enjoyment, which feels even more naive. Not merely the absence of hostility. A nation may be at peace with all of its neighbors, shalom says, but still be miserable in its poverty. To dwell in shalom is to enjoy living before God and to enjoy living in one's physical surroundings and to enjoy living alongside one's neighbors. We might imagine a just community, and let shalom could still be elusive because joy is missing. And I gotta say, I feel like a fool for even saying that. I just want the bullets to stop. But shalom is beckoning us to something deeper. And it's saying, don't set your sights just on that, although that is massive. But to say, what would it mean for us to enjoy each other, not just be bent on each other's destruction? Shalom is intertwined with justice. In shalom, each person enjoys justice, for there is no shalom without justice. However, shalom even goes beyond justice. As Sri Lankan theologian Vinoth Ramachandra points out, injustice is always exclusionary. Therefore, true biblical justice must be inclusive. There is never a point where the invitation to experience God's shalom is not also extended to the practitioners of injustice. An invitation to lay down their oppression making and become shalom making, to become peacemakers. Shalom is more than just ending injustice. It is healing the broken bonds of peace that were meant to exist between people. Yes, shalom is the ending of violence and oppression between people, but shalom is also the establishment of joy and flourishing between those who once were bent on each other's undoing. When we consider shalom as how things ought to be between people, this includes our care for creation, by the way. Shalom incorporates right, harmonious relationships to nature and a delight in our physical surroundings. Shalom comes when we, as bodily creations, not disembodied souls, care for, shape, and labor alongside and delight in our wider world. This world that the Creator has entrusted to us. As author and theologian Lisa Sharon Harper notes, we were meant to be protectors and cultivators and stewards of the land, not its exploiters. Shalom with creation was broken in the fall, but God's plan for the renewing of shalom with creation runs through Jesus and those that follow him. However, so long as environmental degradation and exploitation are present, peace will remain on the horizon. Because the pillaging of the environment in this generation is a form of oppression to the next generation, to those that we won't see and don't know. We are called to steward the earth and its resources because God commanded it, yes, and for the sake of the image bearers who will come after us. And the degree to which we fail to see this connection generationally and fail to work for the care of creation is the degree to which shalom will be elusive and things will not be as they ought to be between people, between this generation and the next. To be peacemakers between people for us is to ask, what can I do in this moment to address injustice, to live righteously, so that shalom can be the result. Lastly, shalom is when things are how they're supposed to be within people, inside of us. Not just for us and not just between us, but in us. Shalom isn't only about the state of things outside of ourselves. Shalom is also what takes place in my own skin. Shalom incorporates the understanding of a right and harmonious relationship with myself. I can be at peace with everybody around me, but have a war waging inside of me. Outwardly, I can present a facade of peace, but on the inside, in my mind or in my emotions or in my soul, I can feel at such dis-ease that it belies my external appearance. And even if things are going well for me, I can have safety and security in my relationships are in right order and I'm caring for the wider world around me. But internally, if I'm at odds with myself, it's not shalom. Shalom is when my whole being finds its integration, when my outside life and my inner life find congruence and are at harmony with one another. When there is distance between these two lives, when there's distance between who I present I am and who I am, when there's this lack of integration, when there is disintegration, I'm living a life of duplicity, a two-facedness, like Batman's nemesis. That's something far less than what shalom is. Shalom invites us to seek peace with one's self and a growing acceptance of who you are. And that's not something you do on your own, but it's because God accepts you just as you are. As Father Greg Boyle reminds us, You are exactly what God had in mind when he made you. You're exactly what God had in mind when he made you. God accepts you just as you are. If you don't change one lick, one plug nickel from who you are right now, God accepts you, welcomes you, and embraces you. And it's on this point that we have to contend with the beautiful truth that we are most at peace with ourselves when we are at peace with our Creator. As Walter Stoff again notes, when the prophets speak of shalom, they speak of a day when people no longer flee God down the corridors of time, a day when they will no longer turn in those corridors and defy their divine pursuer. The centerpiece of any peace and ultimate peace is with God, because God is the originator of the shalom that we seek, and is the one that embodies the shalom that we all ache and long for in our lives, in our relationships, and in our world. Because peace isn't simply a concept or even a future state of transcendent perfection. Peace is a person, and that person is Jesus. Because of Jesus, we can face violence in the streets and metro stations, in schools. And we can work for peace. And it's why we pray for peace and protest injustice, because Jesus took on all of the violence and all of the hatred and injustice and overcame it. We can face isolation and rejection because Jesus took on rejection and overcame it all. We can face sorrow because Jesus faced sorrow and overcame it. Not just so that we can have a peace that masquerades as shallow imaginations of just the absence of conflict, but so that we can have a peace that is deeper and richer and that finds expression in our relationships with others, our relationships with the wider, wild world around us, and peace in our relationships with ourselves, and ultimately peace in our relationship with God. For it is from this ground and this foundation that all of our peacemaking must emerge. Because peace isn't just an idea, but is it a person? But it's a person that has pursued us even in this moment. Let me pray for us.